They didn't break me in a single day. It was erosion, not impact. A series of dinners, jokes, and silences that all said the same thing: you don't belong here. I kept coming anyway. Year after year, I showed up with gifts and fixes, with laughter timed to theirs, even when I was the punchline. I told myself that if I stayed long enough, they'd remember I was one of them. Then came the night my own name became the joke. They laughed at it like it was a setup, not a person. Something inside me went very, very still. I wasn't furious, I was finished. I understood in that quiet that the most dangerous thing you can do to people who think they've erased you is to stop needing them to see you at all. And they had no idea what that silence was about to cost them. I parked 2 blocks from the restaurant and sat there, watching thin rain slide down the windshield. Not a storm, just enough to smear the streetlights into streaks of yellow and white, the kind of rain that makes you consider turning back. For a second, I almost did. But after 40 years of anniversaries, birthdays, and holidays that somehow never had room for me, I decided I'd show up this time. Not because I wanted to, disappearing had never brought peace either, but because I was done vanishing on their behalf. Inside, the place was exactly my mother's taste: dark oak, polished brass, formality dressed up as warmth. The hostess led me down a narrow hall toward a private room. Their laughter leaked through the door before she even touched the handle. The first thing I saw was my father, upright in a navy blazer, telling a story I knew by rhythm if not by content. My mother sat beside him, pearl necklace catching the chandelier light. Brady lounged across the table with the effortless grin of a man who has never doubted his welcome. Leia's hand rested on her husband's arm, smile soft and curated. They looked like a photograph, balanced, complete. When I stepped in, the sound in the room dipped just long enough for everyone to register I was there. My father's face didn't change. My mother's smile flickered on a polite curve, surprise without warmth. "Well, look who finally made it," Brady said, lifting his glass. I smiled the way you do after years of practice, not flinching. "Traffic," I murmured and took the single empty chair at the far end of the table. No one asked what I'd been doing lately. No one ever did. My father tapped his fork against his glass. 40 years, he announced, voice firm, chest full, and I couldn't have done it without the discipline this family stands for. He turned to Brady. "This one, he's the pride of the Wells family." A small cheer circled the table. My mother patted his arm, and Leia with her husband serving the country. We couldn't be more blessed. I adjusted my chair, the legs scraped softly. No one looked up. I slid a small envelope onto the table in front of my father. Inside was a restored photo of him in uniform from decades ago, colors sharpened, frame cleaned of dust and time. He'd never know how many nights I'd spent repairing the digital damage, pixel by pixel. Brady leaned back, smirk settling in. "Must be nice, Jenny. No boss, no alarm clock, no real schedule, huh?" Laughter bounced off the wood-paneled walls, applause for the wrong thing. "Oh, Brady, don't start," my mother chided, still smiling. I took a sip of water, let the cold sit in the back of my throat before I answered. "Must be nice," I said quietly, "to believe uniforms are the only proof of hard work." No one asked me to repeat myself. Maybe they didn't hear, maybe they chose not to. My father lifted his glass again. "Brady just finished a joint exercise last month, got commendations for it too, moving fast in his career." I nodded, lips pressed together, expression neutral. The conversation rolled on without me. Bases, promotions, pensions, weddings, achievements with paperwork and plaques. My plate cooled, mostly untouched. A candle flickered between us, its flame shrinking every time the door opened to the hallway draft. Every word, every laugh underlined how thoroughly I'd been edited out, not out of cruelty, but convenience. It was easier that way. When the bill arrived, Brady snatched it up with exaggerated flourish and earned another round of my father's praise. My mother leaned over and reminded him to send her the photo I'd brought for the family wall, as though it belonged to everyone but me. I left quietly. No one called after me. Outside, the rain had thickened. I walked back to my car under old oaks lining the waterfront, their branches black against the sky. The air smelled of salt and faint wood smoke from the docks. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, hands resting on the wheel. Through the glass, the city blurred into wet light. The wipers thumped once, twice, keeping time like a metronome. In that rhythm, I heard every small dismissal, every joke dressed as affection, every moment I'd been shaved down to something easier to ignore. They built their pride out of medals and titles. I'd built mine out of silence and endurance, and somehow mine had to stay hidden. I turned the key, headlights sliced through the rain. The city streamed past, streetlights shattering across the river like broken glass. For years, I'd believed loyalty meant always showing up, no matter how small they made me feel. But that night, crossing the bridge back into Charleston, I knew something had shifted. They'd kept me at the margins, convinced I was harmless. They were wrong. The rain kept falling, soft, relentless, the sound of something quietly cracking open. At 5:42 a.m., the alarm went off, not the waking kind, the kind that freezes your lungs halfway through a breath. Threat detection alert, Naval Network East. I straightened in my chair. Coffee sat untouched beside the keyboard. 3 monitors glowed in the dim of my apartment, code pulsing like a nervous system. I opened the monitoring console. Unauthorized data crawled across the interface, slow, deliberate, methodical. Whoever it was knew exactly where to search. Then a network tag flashed in the corner. Norfolk Naval Station. For a moment my pulse misfired. Norfolk, Graham's base, Leia's husband, the man they couldn't stop bringing up. My fingers were already moving. Get me the traffic logs. Timestamp -3 hours, I typed into operations chat. No one answered. At this hour we didn't need words. The apartment hummed with fans and distant river sounds. My reflection hovered in the dark window, my face cut clean in half by the pale glow of the screens, one side lit, one side shadow. The breach deepened. Civilian IP masked. Hopping through an old relay, I started peeling back layers, closing gates one by one. Every second mattered. If the intrusion reached command files, entire navigation systems could seize mid-operation. I didn't think about Graham or Leia or what a blackout there would mean. I thought about the architecture of the network and the consequences of failure. For 3 hours, that was my whole world, keys clacking, alerts flipping from red to green, threat vectors rerouting. Finally, the last line of code resolved. The icon shifted from crimson to solid blue. Contained, redirected, clean. I leaned back and exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Outside, the sky had begun to lighten, orange seeping between the blinds. A heron skimmed over the river far below. My muscles ached. The quiet that followed wasn't relief, it was secrecy. No one would ever know. I filed the report in the secured channel. Threat neutralized, source redirected, no compromise detected, sent, logged, classified. One by one, the screens powered down until only my reflection remained in the black glass. Same room, same silence, different weight. Around 9, my phone rang, my mother. I almost let it go to voicemail. Johnny, did you hear? Graham's base had a cyber scare, but he handled it like a hero. Leia says he saved everyone. I stared at the river through the window while she talked, her voice bright with pride, unshakable in its certainty. That's wonderful, Mom, I said. Even to me, the words sounded like they belonged to someone else. She went on about how Graham had always had leadership in him, how proud my father must be to have a son-in-law like that. I let her talk until she ran out of breath, then I hung up. The cursor blinked on my dark screen, a single waiting eye. That afternoon, a message appeared in my classified inbox. Acknowledgement to Defense Systems Analyst, Charleston Division for timely containment. No name, no signature, no fanfare. I read it twice, then deleted it. Nothing to save. Outside, the sun climbed high, breaking across the river in shards of gold. Somewhere up the coast, Graham was probably shaking hands, receiving congratulations. He'd never know that the real fight had happened in silence, 3 hours before Norfolk even realized anything was wrong. I didn't resent him. He had done his job, I'd done mine. But my mother's words stuck with me long after the call ended. Hero, as if that title only counted for people you could see. I poured more coffee and watched the river shimmer like liquid glass. For a moment I pictured telling them the truth, what I actually did, how close they'd come to losing everything they praised so easily. Then I remembered the dinner, the laughter. My father's voice filling the room as if it only echoed for those in uniform. They wouldn't believe me, even if I said it plainly, so I kept it. At dusk I shut everything down and let the apartment go dark. The hard drive's hum faded, leaving only my breathing. It hit me then, the particular loneliness of saving people who will never know they needed saving. I sat by the window until the last light drained from the river and the city flicked on, distant and bright. Somewhere, a radio broadcast might have been lauding a successful defense operation at Norfolk. Somewhere, my family might have been raising a glass to Graham, to honor. To the symbols they believed kept the world intact. And somewhere else here I watched from the shadows, holding the silence that made their safety possible. I finished my coffee, now cold, and spoke into the empty room, not a confession, a promise. Let them have their stories, I'll keep the truth. The text came late on a Friday from a number I hadn't seen in years. "Hey, are you coming to Leia's 40th?" I stared at the screen, the letters glowing faint in the dark. First thought, wrong number. Second, worse, maybe not. I scrolled through my inbox, checked emails, skimmed the family group chat I was technically still a part of. Nothing. No invitation, no mention. Not even a perfunctory hope you can make it. 5 minutes later, another text, a photo this time. Cream invitation, gold script, celebrating Commander's wife and her 40 years of grace. A laugh caught in my throat and never quite made it out. Not loud, not bitter, just broken, so it wasn't an oversight, not a lost email. A clean erasure tucked into an envelope I was never meant to open. The next evening, I drove across town to drop something off for my mother. Her flower shop sat at meeting in Broad, the sign half lit, one bulb twitching like a tired eye. The closed sign hung in the window, but her small silhouette moved inside, precise and steady, fussing with petals long after any customers were gone. I eased the door open. The bell barely chimed. Air heavy with wilting lilies and wet stems, a faint sweetness tangled with the metallic snip of scissors. Her voice floated from behind a rack of vases, cheerful, muffled, unmistakable. "Jun's smart, sure, but smart doesn't feed you. Leia, now that's a woman who made her choices right." Each word landed soft and heavy like slow rain on glass. She laughed at something the person on the line said. The scissors kept clicking. When she finally hung up and turned, she startled slightly at the sight of me. "Oh, I didn't hear you come in," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. I smiled just enough. "It's fine. I just came to drop off the receipt for the medical bill I paid last month." Her eyes flickered, guilt, pride, something knotted between. "You didn't have to." "I know," I said. "I wanted to." She glanced down at the half-finished bouquet drooping in its vase. The silence between us thickened, cloying as carnations. I didn't stay. Outside, the night air hit like cold water, clean, sharp, undeniable. I sat in the car for a moment, watching the soft yellow glow of the shop and my mother's shadow moving inside, still trying to arrange what was already dying. The city was quiet as I drove home. Streetlights trembled across the river. I rolled down the window, letting the wind cut through the fog in my chest. No anger, not yet. Just that old weight of being misread by the people you always chose anyway. They called Leia graceful, reliable, someone who made good choices. She had. She depicted a life they could read, one that fit their world of uniforms and introductions. I'd built systems no one could point to, held together structures that would collapse if I ever let go. It wasn't invisible work, it just didn't register on their scale. Still, hearing my mother say, "Smart doesn't feed you," felt like a line drawn straight through my name. By the time I reached my apartment, it was past midnight. I poured a glass of water and watched a tugboat cross the harbor, its lights small but unwavering. Somewhere on a base I'd helped protect, Graham Sutton was probably asleep, unaware of the breach I'd caught a week earlier. They respected him more in 2 years than they had respected me in 36, and if that system had failed, his face, not mine, would have been on the front page. I took a slow sip and whispered, "You're welcome." The next morning I saw the photo of the invitation again. I should have deleted it, I didn't. I zoomed in on Commander's wife, the way the gold script shone, clean, unquestioned. That was the story they wanted, one they could recite in a single breath. By noon, I'd decided I would go. Not to fight, not to claim a place. I needed to see for myself just how far I'd been erased. There's a particular strength in walking into a room that doesn't want you. It isn't courage. It's curiosity. How invisible am I, really? I closed my laptop and looked at the sunlight fracturing across the river. Something shifted inside me, small, final. For years, I'd waited for them to see me. Now I wanted to see them, really see who they were when they believed I wasn't watching. It didn't feel rebellious. It felt like pulling out a splinter that had been buried too deep for too long. I circled the date on my calendar beneath Leia's 40th. The pen left a groove in the paper. I stared at the mark, thinking how easy it is to celebrate what you can measure, and how hard it is to love what you can't. That night I lay in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the river outside, picturing the party, music, glasses, light. In that space between exhaustion and sleep, one thought stayed: I would go, not as the forgotten one, not as the quiet daughter who stayed small. I would go to see the truth, even if it hurt, even if it changed everything. The Charleston Harbor Resort glowed like a postcard version of reality, warm lights on water, valets in pressed jackets. Salt riding the air. I parked farther away than necessary and sat for a moment before getting out. From the ballroom windows I could already hear their laughter, smooth, confident, sure of itself. Inside, everything smelled like champagne and silver polish. navy blue ribbons draped from the ceiling. Gold-framed photos of Leia and Graham lined a table at the entrance. Above them, a banner celebrating 40 years of grace. I felt the irony settle in my chest and stay there. I lingered near the doorway long enough to take her in. Leia under the chandelier, radiant and composed, people leaning in as she spoke. Cream dress, pearls at her throat, the picture of what my parents called a life well lived. Graham wasn't there yet. My mother spotted me first. She froze, then approached with a smile stretched just a little too tight. "Oh, Johnny, you came." Her voice flickered between relief and dread. "Just try not to make tonight about work, okay?" I nodded once. She exhaled and retreated, leaving a faint trail of jasmine. At the gift table, my present looked wrong among the gleaming boxes and satin bows, a single brown leather-bound book. A restored maritime journal like the one my father used to read from when I was small. I'd spent weeks hunting down and repairing a copy. He'd likely never know. I found a spot at the edge of the room by a table of empty glasses. The lighting was too warm, almost staged. Laughter rose and fell on cue. I poured myself water and watched the chandelier fracture on the surface of the glass. Across the room, my father's voice rose, full and practiced. "My girls did well," he was telling a cluster of guests. One married a Navy officer, one still figuring things out. A low, indulgent chuckle answered. I didn't need to look up to know which one I was. I kept my eyes on the glass, condensation running down my fingers. A shadow slid into my peripheral vision. Brady, grinning, drink in hand. "Look who finally left her laptop. Deadbeat made it to shore." His friends laughed, boys seeing how far they could push. I set my glass down and turned slightly toward him, my voice calm but pointed enough to land. "Funny thing about laptops," I said. "Sometimes they're the reason your ships don't sink." The laughter died. One of his friends coughed and looked at his phone. Brady's smirk faltered. I picked up my glass, took a slow sip, and didn't bother to look back. The MC's voice crackled through the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Commander Graham Sutton." Applause swelled as the doors opened. Graham walked in wearing full dress whites, medals catching the light, posture straight as a mast. People straightened just to be near him. He moved through the crowd, shaking hands, smiling. When his gaze met mine, he hesitated for the briefest beat. His expression shifted, not surprise, recognition. He crossed the room, conversation dulled as he approached my table. Then in front of everyone he came to attention, hand to brow. "Ma'am," the word sliced through the noise. Somewhere a fork hit the floor with a sharp clink, the room locked. 100 eyes pivoted between us. I rose slowly, the air thick in my lungs. My heart slammed once, then steadied. "Commander," I said. Leia froze mid-step, her smile fractured. My father's face drained of certainty. Near the head table, a man whispered loud enough to carry, "Commander Sutton, she's your sister-in-law." Graham didn't look away. "Yes, sir," he replied. "And one of the lead engineers who kept my unit alive last year." Silence settled, the kind that strips away every pretense. My pulse pounded in my fingers and throat, but my face stayed still. People shifted, eyes skittering, unsure where to land. My father's jaw clenched. My mother strangled her napkin. Brady stared at the tablecloth. I sat down deliberately, placing my glass with care. My hand trembled, the water rippled. Graham moved on to greet another officer, posture unchanged, as if what he'd done were routine. The rest of the night congealed. Talk thinned out, smiles went tight. Leia tried to salvage the mood with comments about the cake and Dacre. My father focused on cutting his food into perfect squares. My mother smoothed and resmoothed nothing. No one mentioned the salute. When the cake appeared, white frosting, navy ribbon, I slipped out before they lit the candles. Outside, the air was dense with sea mist. Waves whispered beyond the dunes. Party laughter leaked through the walls, faint as an old recording. In the car, the radio popped on by itself. A news anchor's voice filled the silence. "A successful containment of last week's cyber incident at Norfolk Naval Base has been credited to outstanding collaboration across multiple units." I turned it off. Silence came back, full and soft. For a long moment I watched my breath fog the windshield, then without meaning to I smiled, small, almost private. They had spent years treating me like an unfinished sentence. Tonight, one word had rewritten the story. I started the engine. The resort lights shimmered once in the rearview and fell away as I drove. The tide was rising. So was I by morning. My phone was a storm. Messages lit the screen in waves. My mother, Leia, Brady, distant relatives I hadn't heard from since obligatory Christmas cards. My mother came first. "You could have told us, Johnny." That was humiliating. I watched the words until the screen dimmed, then set the phone down. no reply. They hadn't called when I was sick last winter. They hadn't checked in when the hurricane knocked out my power for 3 days. But this disruption of their narrative was urgent. I made coffee, ignored it, and lost myself in work emails. The normalcy of version numbers and patch deadlines was a kind of anchor. Outside, Charleston moved in its usual slow rhythm. Inside, the air felt tighter, as if the city had inhaled and forgotten how to release. By late afternoon, there was a knock at my door. I didn't need the peephole. Leia stood there in a gray sweater, hair scraped into a tired bun, eyes ringed with sleeplessness. She looked wrung out. "You made me look ridiculous last night," she said immediately. "Everyone was talking about it. They think you tricked us." Her voice wobbled, not from concern for me, but from mortification that her friends had seen her surprised. I kept my tone level. "Not forgiving, just controlled. I didn't make you anything, Leia. I just showed up. You knew Graham would do that." I looked at her. "No. I just knew someone eventually would." She stared, mouth half open, then shook her head, grabbed the doorknob, and left. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the frame. I stayed where I was and let the echo fade. The whispers didn't stop. A coworker forwarded a screenshot circulating through military channels, an internal commendation letter from Naval Command, Norfolk. Subject: Acknowledgement, Cybersecurity Containment, Charleston Division. Special acknowledgement to the Charleston Division Cybersecurity Lead, Juniper Wells, for decisive containment of last year's breach. Signed, Commander Graham Sutton. I closed the email. Opened it again. The words didn't feel victorious. They felt like something sewn shut. That evening, Brady texted for the first time in months. "So it was you." 4 words, no punctuation, no apology. I flipped the phone face down on the counter. Work kept going. So did the quiet, 2 briefings and after-hours systems check. The world had begun in its own slow way to recognize something I'd done. The only people I'd ever wanted to see it still didn't know how. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I drove to the waterfront and followed my usual path. The metal and salt smell wrapped around me, the water so dark it might have been solid. The benches were empty, the street lamps buzzing weak halos onto the pavement. I sat, hands stuffed in my coat pockets, listening to the tide nudge the rocks. The sound matched the tempo of that night at my desk, steady, almost breaking, enduring. For the first time since the breach, I let myself think about Graham, about the way he'd said "ma'am" at the party, not showy, not uncomfortable, just clean respect. He could have kept my name classified in every room except the ones that mattered. Instead, he'd said it in front of everyone. That moment wasn't revenge. It was truth finally allowed inside a room that had borrowed my silence for years. The wind sharpened. I pulled my coat tighter. For a long time, I'd wanted my family to understand. To see that we inhabited the same world, just from different angles. Sitting under that flickering street lamp, I realized I didn't need that anymore. They could hold on to their tidy stories. I had mine written in firewalls and trace logs in sleepless nights. Mine didn't hang on the wall, it held up the wall. I thought of the dinner again, candles, laughter, the way quiet had fallen when Graham spoke my role out loud. In that pause, every small wound I'd brushed aside finally had a name: not forgiven. Not forgotten, just acknowledged. The water slapped against stone, uninterested in human drama. Somewhere out there, ships followed routes protected by systems that hummed because I'd kept them from breaking. They'd mocked me for living in front of a screen. That same screen had kept their world intact. I took my phone out. Brady's message waited. "So it was you." I could have replied, "Yes," or "You're welcome," or something messier. Instead, I locked the screen and slipped it back into my pocket. A ship's horn sounded across the harbor, low, mournful, oddly like recognition. Maybe this was what peace looked like: no apologies. No showdowns, just the quiet fact that people who misjudged you would have to live with their own blindness. I stood, my breath steamed in the cold. The tide nosed higher with each wave, then retreated, unashamed. Graham had said during a briefing once, long before any of this, "The sea doesn't apologize for rising, it just does." That night I finally understood. I wasn't angry anymore, I was sure. I thought everything would settle after the party. It didn't. 3 days passed without a word from my parents. No calls, no texts. The noise came from the periphery instead: emails, messages, curious questions I'd never invited. A cousin I hadn't seen in a decade wrote, "We always knew you were special." "Why didn't you tell us?" I didn't answer. On the 4th morning, there was another knock. My mother stood in the doorway wearing her old beige church coat, clutching a small bouquet of carnations, half apology, half prop. Her eyes weren't soft. They were calculating, like she was gauging how deep a stain might have set. "Johnny, people are talking," she said. Your sister's mortified. Graham's name is all over the local paper. You should have warned us. I leaned against the frame. The bouquet trembled in her hands. You mean you're embarrassed I'm not who you thought I was? Her mouth tightened. For a second I thought she'd drop the flowers. Then she turned, voice clipped. You always were difficult. She set the bouquet on the floor and walked away. I watched the closed door for a long moment, then picked up the flowers and dropped them in the sink. At work, the atmosphere had shifted. Colleagues glanced at me and looked away. Someone had seen the article. My team pretended nothing was different mostly. Mark, one of the younger analysts, stopped at my desk, clutching coffee like a shield. So, the commander saluted you? He tried to sound casual, failed. It wasn't for me, I said, eyes on my screen. It was for the work. He nodded as if that made perfect sense and retreated. A new email flashed in my inbox. From Graham Sutton, no subject. That salute wasn't performance, it was overdue. You saved us. They needed to know what that meant. P.S. I'm sorry for how they treated you. I read it 3 times. My thumb hovered over reply. Anything I wrote would shrink it. I deleted it. Some acknowledgments are bigger when they stay between you and the truth. That night Leia called. Her voice shook, frayed at the edges. You've made everything so awkward. Johnny, everyone thinks we hid you on purpose. We didn't mean. Intent doesn't erase impact, I said. She fell silent. I could hear her breathing, quick and uneven. You sound like one of your briefings, she muttered. That's because you've never listened to one. The line went dead. I set the phone down and turned to the window. Moonlight skated across the river, broken by each small wave. Office windows across the water were dark, but the streetlights painted trembling threads on the surface. There, gone, there again. The quiet did soothe. It stretched like a wound you'd finally stopped covering. My family wasn't upset by what I'd done. They were upset by what it looked like. By the way it rearranged the roles they'd rehearsed for years. For them, reputation was doctrine. I'd committed blasphemy simply by existing outside their script. Truth to them wasn't something to live with, it was something to manage, but it doesn't shrink to fit the space you give it. I studied my reflection in the glass. I didn't look furious. I looked steady, finished with pretending. Maybe this was justice, not applause or vindication, but the distance that forces everyone to sit with what they chose. Justice doesn't always restore balance. Sometimes it redraws the lines. Around midnight, I turned off the lights and let the room sink into darkness. City glow leaked in through the blinds in thin bars of gold. I thought about Graham's salute again, not as defiance, not as pity, but as one soldier recognizing another, even if only one wore the uniform. My family had chased that kind of recognition all their lives. The only person who'd given it freely was someone who didn't owe them anything. It should have hurt more than it did. Instead, it clarified. Before dawn, I woke to the gray wash of early light. The river hummed beyond the window. Coffee steamed in my hands, cooling faster than I drank it. I'm not difficult, I said softly to the empty room. You just never tried to understand me. The words didn't burn, they settled. For the first time in years, I felt no compulsion to prove anything. The distance between us no longer felt like punishment, it felt like space, and in it I could breathe. A week later, my father called. His name on the screen looked unfamiliar. His voice was dry, precise, stripped of tone. Your mother wants to have dinner. Family only. I listened to the refrigerator hum to my own breathing. I wanted to say no, but some doors need to be closed while you're looking at them. All right, I said. Friday night, I drove the old road to the house I'd grown up in. Nothing along the route had changed, the same bent trees, the same mailboxes. Time had gone elsewhere. The porch light was on. Through the front window, the chandelier cast its golden circle. My mother's shadow moved in the kitchen. My father opened the door standing straight as always, shoulders squared, gaze scanning like I was reporting for inspection. Juniper, Dad, the word sat between us, familiar and foreign at once. Inside, nothing had moved in years. My father's framed uniform photo still dominated the living room wall, flanked by Leia and Graham's wedding portrait. The air smelled like roast and lemon cleaner, scrubbed, controlled. The table was set with precision. I took my usual seat just off-center, close enough to hear, too far to count. Leia sat with eyes rimmed red, Brady across from her, thumb tapping his glass, glancing at me and away. My mother emerged carrying the main dish. Her smile trembled as she set it down. We're family, she began carefully. We shouldn't let one misunderstanding ruin that. I held her gaze. This wasn't one misunderstanding, it was decades of them. Silence blanketed the table. From the kitchen, the oven hissed as it cooled. My father cleared his throat, fingers drumming once. You should have trusted us, we would have been proud. No, Dad, I said. You would have been proud if my success looked like yours, that's not the same thing. The words landed like lead, final, his mouth opened then shut. The chandelier light flashed off the knife at my place setting. No one moved. Leia's voice broke the stillness, small and rough. You're right, we erased you, we built a story you didn't fit in. I'm sorry, her face held no defense this time, only a quiet, shaking honesty. I drew in a slow breath. I'm not angry, I said. But I'm done auditioning for a seat at this table. The sentence hovered, sharp and light. I pushed my chair back and stood. No one reached out. My father's hand twitched, then stilled. My mother folded her napkin into smaller and smaller squares. Brady stared at his plate. Leia wiped her cheek, tears silent. I walked toward the door. The house creaked under my steps, familiar floorboards complaining like old memories. Just as my hand closed on the handle, my father's voice followed, smaller than I'd ever heard it. You looked like your mother when you said that. I paused and turned slightly, just enough to meet his eyes. Then maybe there's still hope for her. Something flickered across his face, recognition, regret, something too frail to name. Then it was gone. I opened the door. Cool night air swept in, smelling faintly of the ocean. No one spoke as it closed behind me. The street was quiet. The windows glowed, but I didn't look back until I reached the end of the driveway. The house seemed smaller now, maybe it always had been. I took a deep breath, it tasted like endings. For so long, I'd mistaken their approval for love, their silence for stability, their pride for something I was required to earn. Under the same stars I'd grown up with, I finally understood, love without understanding isn't love. It's obedience. The realization didn't hurt, it settled someplace quiet. Driving away, my headlights carved pale lines in the dark. In the rearview, the house slipped behind trees and into nothing. For the first time in years, I didn't feel shut out, I felt free. I didn't belong to that table anymore, and for once that didn't equal loss, it meant release. At the main road, I rolled down the window. Night air rushed in cold, clean. The weight I'd carried for half a lifetime began to lift, slow as fog unpeeling from water. I didn't need an apology, I didn't need understanding. What I had now was quieter, stronger, peace. And for the first time, I intended to keep it. A month after that final dinner, an email arrived from the Defense Coordination Office. Subject, invitation to speak Norfolk Military Summit. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it. The language was formal, respectful, dry. I was ready to click decline. I'd had enough of being a topic. Then I saw the line at the bottom. Panel topic, cyber integrity and command responsibility. The exact title of the proposal I'd written the year before, the one they'd rejected because they needed a higher profile name. Now they wanted mine. Friday morning, I drove to Norfolk. The sky sagged low and gray, making the water look like poured steel. Flags along the harbor snapped in the wind. I caught my reflection in the rearview when I parked. Hair pinned back, navy suit pressed, face calm. No ribbons, no rank, just me. Inside the conference center, the air buzzed with controlled energy. Officers in dress blues clustered and moved, badges flashing under fluorescent lights. I felt out of uniform and exactly where I belonged. I spotted Graham before he saw me, talking with a knot of commanders near the stage. When his eyes found mine, he gave a small nod, acknowledgement without theatrics. Then I noticed them. In the last row, almost hidden, sat my mother and father. She had her hands clasped tight. His posture was ramrod straight, expression unreadable. The sight knocked something loose in my chest. For a second, I considered walking out. If I left, though, I'd be making space for someone else to narrate my work again. I'd had enough of that. The host's voice crackled over the speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Juniper Wells, lead defense architect, Charleston Division. Polite, curious applause. I walked to the podium, heels tapping on the polished floor. The stage lights blinded at first, then softened as my eyes adjusted to the dark sea of faces, rows of uniforms, gold buttons, intent stares. I didn't bring notes. Honor isn't a medal, I began. It's the integrity that keeps the system from collapsing. Real command isn't about titles, it's about accountability. The words came easily, each finding its place. I spoke of invisible warfare, of threats carried not by ships or missiles but by strings of code. I referenced Project Indigo, not the classified core, just enough for those who knew to understand the weight of it. The room was very still, pens scratched occasionally, the projector hummed. I paused for water and let my gaze drift just once to the back. My mother watched me with both her hands wrapped around my father's. My father stared without blinking, his jaw set not in anger but in attention. I went on, my voice lower now. The foundation of security is trust. Not blind obedience, but the kind earned through action, clarity. And courage that doesn't require recognition to exist. I ended the way I'd written the talk the first time, the sentence that had been cut as too personal, when integrity becomes invisible. The whole structure is already broken. Silence followed. Deep, solid like a collective held breath. Then the room rose, applause rolled forward like surf hitting shore, clean, layered, insistent. I didn't bow. I nodded once the way Graham had at the party, the way my father used to after an inspection. Enough. When the clapping faded, people began filing out. A few stopped to shake my hand, to say thanks. I answered what I could, smiled where it seemed right. Near the exit, my father and mother waited. For once, my father didn't look composed. He looked unsteady, as if he'd arrived without the right script. When the crowd thinned, he stepped closer. Fine lines cut deeper into his face than I remembered. "You looked like you belonged up there," he said. I tilted my head. "That's because I do." He nodded once, no apology, no elaboration. But something in the air shifted, small and precise, like the click of a lock giving way. We stood for a moment, saying nothing, listening to the murmur of people behind us and the flutter of flags through the open doorway. For the first time, my father didn't look at me as the daughter who'd fallen short of an unspoken standard. He looked at me as someone who had built her own. I didn't thank him. He didn't justify himself, we didn't need to. Outside, the sea air hit sharp and clean, waves knocked against the pier in a steady rhythm, boots echoed on pavement. There was no sweeping reconciliation, no embrace, just a plain, quiet fact. For once I'd been seen as I was, it was enough. Clouds began to thin, sunlight pushing through in narrow streaks. I stood there, letting the wind snap around me, watching the flag whip high above the harbor. For years, I'd treated acknowledgement like oxygen, something rationed out by others. Now I understood it had always been mine to claim. When I turned back toward the parking lot, I glimpsed my parents through the glass doors, still standing side by side, still watching, no smiles. No tears, just stillness, the kind that means something has shifted, however slightly. I walked away, the sounds of the harbor filling the space around me. No badges, no apologies. Just wind, salt, and quiet. For the first time, the silence felt like respect. 2 days after the summit, I drove back to Charleston. The world had that muted calm that follows a storm, no wreckage, just a hush. My apartment smelled of rain and old coffee. On the kitchen table lay 2 envelopes. One crisp white with a Navy return address, the other off-white, edges smudged, my sister's looping handwriting on the front. I opened Graham's first. That salute wasn't for show. It was for the nights no one saw, for the systems that held while others slept. You taught me something that day. Real strength doesn't need to be seen, but it deserves to be saluted. His tone was steady, unsentimental, soldier to soldier. Leia's letter felt lighter in my hand, as if written against resistance, for believing what was easier to believe. For standing beside you at tables where we let them mock you, for not asking who you really were. I'm sorry, Johnny, not because I'm ashamed, because I finally see. The 2 notes rested side by side on the table, edges touching like overlapping timelines. I folded them both and left them there. They barely weighed anything. The room was quiet. The rain slowed to a faint tapping against the window. No dramatic music, no flood of tears, just the refrigerator's hum and the soft presence of words that didn't need answers. I didn't write back. Not out of anger, because there was nothing left that required explaining. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't reopening a door, it's knowing you don't have to walk through it anymore. The quiet didn't feel like absence, it felt like peace. By late afternoon, the road opened toward the coast. Folly Beach appeared through the windshield, gray horizon, pale surf, sky sagging with the promise of more rain. It had been years since I'd come this way, but the air still held that raw mix of salt and driftwood. I parked by the dunes and stepped out. The wind tugged at my coat, carrying the sea straight into my lungs. This was the beach I'd sat on alone after one of those dinners years ago, when I still believed belonging was something to beg for. Now the same stretch of sand felt unchanged and entirely different. It was mine. I kicked off my shoes and walked toward the water. The first cold touch of surf reached my ankles, numbing and steady. The tide reached forward, then withdrew, testing, measuring. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't need to check to know. From Graham, they're proud, you know, even if they don't know how to say it. Wind whipped hair across my face as I looked at the message. Then I typed, tell them they don't need to. Some things are better left in silence. I slipped the phone away and turned back to the water. The horizon stretched, shifting and refusal to be neatly framed. That used to frighten me. Now it felt like truth. Every wave seemed to carry an old moment with it, every dig, silence, and side glance. One by one, they broke on the shore and slid back into the deep. There was no bitterness in watching them go, only release. For so long, I'd thought justice meant making them see. But justice, I finally understood, is peace, the moment you no longer need their eyes to know your worth. The wind eased, the tide settled into a low, even rhythm. For once, nothing demanded performance. I turned from the water, feet pressing cool patterns into the wet sand, and walked back toward the road. The late light broke through the clouds at last, spilling across the asphalt in liquid gold. Behind me, the waves kept their tempo, steady and unconcerned, no swelling soundtrack, no triumphant roar. Just wind threading the dunes and the soft, certain beat of my own steps. I wasn't walking away anymore, I was simply moving forward. And in that quiet, salt-washed silence, I finally knew, some endings don't need applause to prove they W.